That means it's time for PulumiVision. Did you know that that's what happens on Fridays? You know it now. I'm Matty Stratton. I'm a staff developer advocate here at Pulumi, and joining me again just a few short weeks after the last time we did a PulumiVision stream is my buddy Lee Briggs. Who Lee, what would you say you do here?
I guess I'm technically a solutions engineer, but I've been around the company, all the company departments at this point, so I do a bit of everything. But yes, my title is solutions engineer at this point.
So you engineer some solutions. That's
I
cool.
engineer solutions, exactly. Yeah.
What we're going to dig into a little bit is Lee had a tweet thread. Looks like it was it was just about a week ago. Actually, it was literally a week ago today.
Yeah.
And kind of saying, there's a lot of there is a lot of discussion and challenges in trying to pick an infrastructure as code tool here in the year 2022. So we thought would be kind of fun is we're going to kind of go through these things. So when we're thinking about infrastructure as software, it's not a new idea. We've been kicking this around for a long time. We've seen a lot of tools and solutions come and go. And kind of want to go through that. And then please, in the chat, let us know your questions, your opinions. This is one of those where, sometimes you might be at a conference and someone's like, this is less of a question and more of a comment. We're like, don't be that person.
Mhm.
Like, absolutely be that person in the chat. We want to hear your comments and your thoughts as they go. So, we've got the, you can see there's a short link up there. I'll paste it in the chat if you want to kind of go along with what we're going to be talking about. But Lee, why don't you talk a little bit about like what, all great Twitter threads have an origin story.
Yeah. So I hang around the community quite a lot. I'm in a bunch of different DevOps Slacks, and I think Friday I saw something that I see all the time when it comes to infrastructure as code and comparing all the different things. And the thing that really kind of like prompted me to start writing about this was the idea that infrastructure code abstractions need to be inflexible. They need to be written in a DSL or written in a configuration language, because if you, quote, let software developers write code, you're going to end up with a complex mess and a complex jangle. And I thought, that's something that I see all the time, and it's something that I personally believe is a little bit of FUD. So from a personal perspective, I wanted to talk about my experience when choosing infrastructure as code. And obviously, I'm super biased. Like, I come from a Pulumi perspective, and I work here, and I believe that Pulumi is the right solution and right tool for most people at this point. But when people start comparing features between different infrastructure as code solutions, they'll talk about the state management and the features that are available. And I really just think it comes down to two user experience questions. And that is, how is it to actually define your infrastructure? What is the experience that people get when they're writing the code or writing the configuration to actually define the infrastructure? And then how do you get that from your laptop that you've written into the actual cloud? And that's the execution experience. So that's kind of where it came from. Trying to pull back the layers of all the, you have to use this tool because I'm an opinionated person and this is the right way to do it.
Well, that's one reason. No, but I agree with you when it comes to the tech boxes. And just for some, what this made me think of, and I didn't really think about it as much when I was reading your thread, but it kind of nailed it, is like the experience of what it's like. And I'll take a quick little history lesson. It's not a history lesson of the history of config management and infra code, but just personally. So like Lisa, I've been kicking around a bit. The reason I'm bringing this up is so I spent more than a couple years working at Chef, which was now it's, we'd say it's one of the modern, config management tools, which maybe doesn't feel as modern now because time is a construct. But one of the things that was always really interesting to me, especially when I was working as a sales engineer for Chef, is we would sit there and we're like, okay, how do we, people wanted to understand what it was like. And the thing is, like, kind of getting going with Chef was non-trivial, right?
Yeah.
You had to set up a Chef. So you had to do a lot of stuff to even get to the point to figure out if you even got any value out of it. And the value was, and we used to run in this a lot, where I would come in, I'd be talking to a prospect, and they were like, we want you to do a proof of concept. And I hit a point when I said, this is not about proving the concept. The concept is that Chef can automate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That concept is sound and it's proven. The question is, do you have value? And not even value from a, we can move X more widgets and our cycle times reduced, but like, will you as a person have this feeling? And so we did. I'm not going to dig into it too much right now. We can talk about it a little bit later if it's interesting, about like how we did this process. We called it a proof of value, which, like all other words in the world, are overloaded and they mean other things in different parts of sales. So don't get on me about that. But what we tried to experience was say, hey, I'm going to come into your organization and your teams. We're going to spend 2 days together. And it's going to be like I have a time machine. And I'm going to flash forward to you 6 months into your Chef adoption. And we're going to work together for a couple days. And this is what working in this world of continuous delivery of infra code, is going to be like. So you can decide. And then when you have that, and you have that kind of feeling, and you're like, oh, this is rad, I like this experience to be my daily life, then you're like, okay, cool, let's figure it out. But if it's all hypothetical, that's no good. And so what I'm getting at is, it wasn't about the features. It wasn't about the things that go in an RFP, which, if you don't know, that's a request for, that's what happens. Someone wants to buy software. They're like, they're going to ask all their vendors the same questions. Do you tick this box? Do you have, a YAML version 3.7 provider that can work with DoD standard 59/Z? But really, it's like, okay, the people using this what's it going to be like to do that? So I think, to reiterate to Lee's point, it's about the experience. And I think that goes into, there are different kinds of, you kind of broke down what did that experience mean.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels between what we're experiencing now and the configuration management battle days of Puppet, Chef, and Ansible, right? And I think, again, something that I see very often is like, well, we tried this with Chef and it didn't work, right? And it wasn't successful. And like, everybody wanted to use Ansible and everybody wanted to use Puppet because they were like opinionated DSLs, and the limited flexibility in the language meant that you could only make so many mistakes. And I think there's something that's really changed since those days. Since 10 years ago now, we were all talking about whether we were going to choose, how we were going to choose a configuration management tool. And now it's 2022 and we're doing the same thing, but with API driven provisioning. And the difference, in my opinion, is that the barriers between operations and development have really broken down. Maybe not in the way that we all expected when DevOps kind of like started 10 to 15 years ago. I don't really think it's taken on a life of its own that I don't think any of us really expected. But more developers are working and interacting with infrastructure. And I certainly personally was one of those system administrator type people, one of those infrastructure type people who really was really gatekeeping the cloud and saying, look, you developers, you don't really know how to do this. And if developers are going to write infrastructure code, it's going to turn into a horrible mess. And I have to eat a little bit of humble pie here and say I was completely wrong about that, because, and there's two reasons, right? There are many more developers than there are infrastructure people in organizations. Usually there's a very, very small team of infrastructure people. And if you're on an infrastructure side of things and you're gatekeeping access to your cloud and provisioning infrastructure, you're not going to be able to manage the influx of requests in a way that's going to allow your organization to scale. That's the first problem. And then the second problem really comes down to the fact that if you're terrified of somebody writing code that you can't understand because of the power and the expressibility in that language, then really you aren't really taking an opportunity to learn. You're not taking an opportunity to grow your skills. And I wrote a blog post about a year ago now in which I talked about my personal journey from an infrastructure-based person who was writing shell scripts and very, very small Python scripts to automate stuff, and how I used Pulumi to actually become a better software engineer. And that's been a really great experience for me. I'll be frank and honest that I really didn't understand object-oriented concepts until about 2 years ago, because you see the tutorials that talk about, well, this is a person, and then an instantiation of a person class is a name class or something like that, or like an animal class and a dog class, and it just didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't really get my head around it. And then when you actually apply it to a concept that I knew pretty well in terms of the cloud and like actual provisioning infrastructure, and you have a Pulumi component resource, which is an abstraction of an instance, and then you can have a managed instance. That was a really kind of like eye-opening perspective for me.
I mean, I would love to know if there's anybody in the chat or whatever that actually finds explaining object-oriented programming by using class like dog is a
Why did
subclass
we
of animal.
decide this was the right way to do it? I never
First of all,
understood.
I mean, unless you're actually coding pets, like maybe you're making the Ibo robot. Remember was it Ibo, that the
Yeah,
Sony robot dog? Like that's literally the only time that happens, or maybe a virtual pet or something. But most of us aren't doing that,
yeah.
so it's not just us dumb infra people that didn't make sense to. I'm pretty sure it was a lot of us, a lot of people. I was thinking too a little bit like you were talking about, first of all, it's just the scale of being able to keep up with that and getting that stuff in the way. One of the things too, also as Lee, I come from an infrastructure and an ops background, and I certainly was someone who felt that my biggest enemy was developers, and my biggest job was protecting my systems from them.
Mm-hmm.
And but one of the things I always find really funny is you'll get a lot of this, right? This is why we can't. There you go. Classes equals code templates. That easy. See, why didn't anybody ever tell me that?
I think people could make a lot of great content around actually teaching object-oriented concepts that don't talk about dogs and animals and people and names,
or shapes.
right? Like,
That's the other one too.
yeah, that's
Circle is a subclass
yeah,
of
yeah.
But anyway, the funny thing I was thinking is like I'm like every sysadmin or whatever who's like, oh my god, if we gave ops access to or dev access to production, they wouldn't be trusted. They couldn't do whatever. And I swear, any of you, we go out to the pub and over a pint, you will tell me every time you completely destroyed production, because there's this hubris that having the title of ops means we are infallible. And I've got news for you: we all know we're not.
But
But
one of my favorite things to do
yeah.
is go to the Reddit sysadmin, the sysadmin Reddit, and like look at the sheer surliness that comes out of that place around how users are idiots and
I mean, there's
developers are
reasons
stupid.
that scar tissue. Everything happens because of
Agreed,
scar
yeah.
tissue. We get it, but
And I
we're
understand
supposed to
it
be better
really.
about this now. Yeah.
I understand it really, but I think the thing that I learned moving out of infrastructure and infrastructure administration and becoming a software developer slash sales engineer or solutions engineer is that every part of the organization has value, and like telling people they can't do something is not a valuable thing to kind of add to an organization. No is not a useful word in an organization in a lot of situations. There are times when you have to use it and you have to be kind of pragmatic about it, but just generally blocking everybody from being effective is generally not going to make everybody happy. And so that was my personal learning experience.
It's for sure, and I think like this also goes, and we'll get into this a little bit. I think maybe a little later when we start talking about the experiences. But one of the things, and I talk about this when I talk about kind of like how I think we're evolving into cloud engineering and where these things change from DevOps, but a lot of it is sort of understanding the guardrails are empowering rather than limiting.
Mhm.
So a lot of times people feel like, oh, I don't want to limit people in what they can do because they'll get mad. I'm like, actually, I don't know about you, but I really kind of like it when I feel like guardrails allow people to have a lot of confidence, right?
My perfect situation, and again, it's a biased perspective, and I think Palumi's done a really good job of this. And there are other solutions out there to kind of do this, but the Pulumi multi-language components, which is a best practice implementation of your infrastructure, designed by people who know how it should look, combined with some kind of policy engine, which kind of like really protects you from the edges of the world. Really like the perfect, combination to me. You should be able to get what you need done, but you should have those kind of like bowling alley buffers on either side of the lane that stop you from falling into the gutter, right? And I think that's what I see as a policy engine. I know that we're researching some exciting things around policy and how we can manage that here at Palumi, and we have a policy of code policy as code offering. But I'm really personally excited about like that future. And It's funny because the cloud providers really allow you to do a bunch of things by default that you really shouldn't be doing, like public IP addresses on the internet, no problem, like public databases, and let's spin up 5,000 EC2 instances and have a huge bill, and they'll let you do that by default, and you have to put those guardrails in place.
So if we sort of think back to, we talked about the experience, and you kind of broke it down to that you have an authoring and you have an execution experience. So like, kind of what do you want to talk about those a little bit, and then we can kind
Well,
of
actually,
see
I have
what you're seeing.
a couple of little. We'll talk a little bit about it,
Oh,
and then I have a couple of examples of
okay,
what I was kind of
cool.
talking
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
for that. But the execution experience, I think, is one of the most unique parts of the kind of the ecosystem. And before I talk about that, I'll just round out with the authoring experience. It is my opinion that there's basically two camps with the authoring experience. There's the configuration camp, whether that's YAML, JSON, HCL, DAL, JSONic, Q, any of those different kind of like mechanisms to basically output a configuration language. And then there's a software language kind of consideration. It's really, really important to make sure that the distinction between imperative and declarative is not brought in here, because even if you're writing things in software languages, the end result is a declarative kind of manifest. And so one of my personal pet peeves, and something that I'm getting really tired of dealing with, is people saying that Pulumi and AWS CDK are imperative. They are fundamentally not. The understanding of how imperative and declarative, when I'm engaging with people like that, is usually a misnomer around the authoring experience rather than the execution experience.
The fact that you're only getting annoyed by this now tells me that you were not someone who was trying to convince people to use Chef back in the day, because we've been
It's
having these
yeah,
same arguments over and over
yeah,
and over
yeah.
again.
It's
And it
never going to
doesn't
end, I don't think.
actually, I got news for you. It doesn't even matter, even if you're right,
Yeah.
because it's about the experience. But yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So the authoring experience is really, in my opinion, shifting heavily towards software languages and software. In my personal experience, you see the investment that Amazon has put into with CDK. You see the investment that HashiCorp is putting into Terraform CDK. Pulumi was obviously the innovator here, and we kind of started this trend, and I think everybody's really proud of that we're kind of changing the way that people look at things. And I know I see Chris Novus here, and I think Chris has talked at length about the kind of infrastructure languages defined in software. Essentially, I personally think that we've as an industry started to move towards. It's very similar to how I felt about Kubernetes 7 years ago. Like, it's going in this direction, whether you like it or not. And I think getting on the train now is probably like a good idea. And I think we've all kind of decided that software is the way to go. This is really great stuff from Chris. We should have got Chris on here. The execution experience is really, really up for grabs at this point, in my personal opinion, right? Like, there's three kind of camps that you fit into. There is the traditional CI/CD driven mechanism that I think was the beginning of the infrastructure as code execution experience, which is you write your infrastructure as code program, you shove it into a CI pipeline. All you're allowed to do is use that CI pipeline, and it applies against a bunch of APIs, and that is the experience. I personally don't like that anymore, and I'll talk a little bit why in a few minutes. Yes, David, Palumi was around before AWS CDK. It was not public, but it was definitely around before AWS CDK. If you ever see me at a conference, let's have a beer, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the execution experience, I personally don't like CI/CD with infrastructure anymore, because I don't think CI/CD is robust enough to actually do the provisioning that you need in a lot of cases. It doesn't have useful execution in terms of retries and backoffs and all that kind of stuff. I actually think that we're going to see a lot of workflow engines. Temporal is a great example, or Cadence. Simple workflow engine. Prefect is based on Airflow, is very similar to this. These kind of like retriable mechanisms for infrastructure, I think, are going to start to take off a little bit. The second experience is really the server-side experience that you get with things like Azure Resource Manager and CloudFormation. You write things in CDK, you get a CloudFormation template, you apply that CloudFormation, you send that CloudFormation template to AWS, and AWS handles provisioning all those resources. It's kind of a very hands-off, but very, very opinionated mechanism. Where I personally see Pulumi really winning here, in my opinion, is that we let you decide what execution experience you want to have. You can use the CI/CD experience. You can use Automation API and build custom command line tools and custom web interfaces, or you can attach it to workflow engine type stuff and create server-side components very similar to how CloudFormation works. You obviously have to build them yourself, but you can actually choose your own adventure there.
There were a couple things I just wanted to, I was sort of catching up on the
chat's awesome.
A little bit. I've been pulling a couple things in there too, but I think that's a really good point that Nova makes, which is right. If how you get there, right? But the thing is, if something is not changing, then it's not changing. And there's ways you can address that in several things, right? Which is to be able to say, this is, again, we have these arguments about philosophical, declarative, imperative, and then also, nobody's brought up idempotency. Oh, by the way, so we are putting the chat, so the consolidated chat you should see in the stream. But yes, we're streaming a couple places, so you won't necessarily see everybody's comments inside your chat thingy, but you will see it in the stream over to the side, right, in the video itself. So we're doing the best we can when it comes to that. So cool. So when we kind of think about that, so y'all who are in the chat, like, what are your, kind of as we're going, would love to hear kind of where you're seeing what makes sense to you, because we kind of said there's different perspectives on that, where those go in. And I think when you kind of touched on something too, Lee, that I kind of bring up, like we use this. This is getting into a little bit of a peeve of mine slightly. We use this consolidated term of CI/CD to fundamentally just mean an orchestrated pipeline.
Yeah.
That has an input, a bunch of stuff happens, and something happens at the end. And I will tell you that 90% of the time it has nothing to do with CI. And also everybody gets confused about what the D means, because it can mean two different things. And it doesn't matter. None of them are right or wrong, but there's confusion about that. But fundamentally, I think having an automated flow, but whether or not, so I just want to sort of make sure I'm kind of getting your thought when you say you don't feel that the pipelines, is it because it like sort of bringing the infrastructure with the application pipeline, like, or is it, I just want to kind of
a very common pattern that we're seeing, like, let's say you're an organization that has a multi-tenant application and you provision a bunch of infrastructure resources per tenant, right? Like you have a web page, and then the user signs up, and in the back end, it provisions a bunch of infrastructure that then the user can log into their SaaS application. The default setting for a lot of organizations that I've seen that are starting down this path is that they will set off a CI pipeline for every single user that signs up, right? And it triggers a CI pipeline that then runs to completion and then returns a bunch of results. Now, the problem with most CI and CD tools, whether they are GitHub Actions, Circle CI, and all that kind of stuff, is that if you use them to do that kind of multi-stage orchestration, the retriability and the actual consistency and the reliability of that is usually really low. And I actually built something like this at a previous employer, and what we found was we were spending more time nursing the broken pipelines through to completion than we were actually provisioning customers, right? And this is a really, really common refrain of mine of like, CI/CD pipelines were designed in a world where you were supposed to do unit tests and integration tests on code. They weren't designed to do complex workflow orchestration. And we've seen products turn up that are really designed to solve this problem. And they're really, really good. A colleague of ours, Mikhail Shilkov, did an excellent blog post about integrating Pulumi with Temporal and using Pulumi and Automation API to drive the execution, which I will fish out in a few moments and we'll share. But those mechanisms, when you want reliability in your infrastructure provisioning, shoving it into a CI/CD pipeline is often not the default setting there. Like if you are just kind of having like the base infrastructure, then CI/CD can be great. But if you're designing a platform that you want other people to use, it's really important that you kind of think about the reliability. And I'm going to talk about another talk that I saw a few years ago, and I'll fish it out in a few seconds, that talks about the mathematics of reliability, in the sense that if you have 2 different CI pipelines that are 99.9% completion, like successful. You multiply them together and they're actually 99.7% successful. And having these chaining mechanisms inside your infrastructure provisioning is, creates unreliability. And so I really don't agree with using CI/CD pipelines heavily when it comes to infrastructure provisioning at this stage. But there's a lot of work to do in this area. Like I said, I think the execution experience is, really up for grabs at this point. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation here, to be honest. The chat is very busy, and I love this.
I know, and Nova's. I think that chat's gonna be too. Actually, let's see what happens if I try to show the whole thing. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's gonna be too much. But the keys of that, I think was sort of saying some things that were similar and some additional stuff, but CD not being necessarily, Nova says not necessarily net positive for most systems. That's absolutely true, right? So if we think about what the idea of continuous delivery is versus continuous deployment, it's just that your code is deployable at any time. It's a business decision. That's not necessarily combined and congruent with complex infrastructure. And if you, like I said, Nova says if most people build a pipeline, and if you have to do anything that's not in the pipeline, you're kind of screwed with that. I'm really trying to find Mikhail's blog post.
I actually think it's a GitHub repo. So
yeah,
okay,
there we go. I was gonna say that I got. I will drop that in. The Pulumi temporal workflow repo.
Yes, that's the one.
Yep. Okay. We'll drop that in the chat.
And I think Temporal has, I love the people at Temporal. I think what they're building is really, really interesting. But what they're building is really, really a great fit for Pulumi and Automation API. It's a really, really powerful combination. The other thing that I talked about, the mathematics of reliability talk that I talked about, which is by a gentleman I met many years ago called Avishai, and he did this amazing talk, and I've just sent it to you over the chat so you can share the link. He did this talk that talks about how if you multiply 5 or 6 things that you think are reliable together, the reliability gets much, much lower. And so those 2 things together are really part of what I'm talking about when I say the execution experience and what that means. Maybe now is a good time to kind of pivot into doing a quick demo. I haven't done a whole bunch of practice here, so it'll be very live and very potentially broken, but we'll see what it looks like.
That's what we do here on PulumiVision. If you're new to PulumiVision and are expecting some slick, well-tuned, everything works great demos, then I recommend you go somewhere else. But if you want to see us work at the edge of our comfort zone, then
we're learning together, Matty. That's essentially what we've got here, right? So you'll see here I've got 3 repositories, and I haven't actually.
No, they won't see anything yet because I haven't let them see anything.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. Hey, can you embiggen that by like much more?
Yeah, there we go. That better?
Little more. What are you doing? Okay.
I am making it bigger, and
I know. Okay. But you keep getting clear, and then I can't tell if you made it bigger.
Yeah.
That looks great. Let's try that. Let us know in the chat if it's not embiggened enough.
So I've kind of grabbed the foremost kind of well-known infrastructure infrastructure tools. I actually never got the cross-plane example finished, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So with the Terraform code that we have here, I've just written a very simple Terraform program that creates a VPC and creates a subnet. Obviously, we talked about the authoring experience. You can use Terraform CDK if you wish, but essentially the experience when you're actually provisioning the infrastructure is you would run a plan, you maybe get a plan manifest, and then you run Terraform apply, and it kind of runs like this. And that's generally what you are going to experience, and it'll hit yes, and it'll go and do the provision and blah, 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 blah. And this is kind of what you're expecting to happen, right? Like this could be in a CI/CD pipeline. It could be run from your local laptops or whatever. And this is generally the experience that I think most people getting into infrastructure as code are used to and familiar with. And, in a lot of situations, there's really nothing wrong with this, but the user experience can often be really difficult because let's say you have a team of software developers who are now trying to manage their own application. They have to know the CI/CD tool inside and out. They have to know the how the actual thing works. They have to be able to run all the commands to actually get things set up. And they don't really have a lot of choice. They don't really get to choose how they want things to work and operate. And if there's one thing that I've learned about developers, it's like they like to make their lives easier, and they like to have an easy time of things. And kind of introducing this kind of mechanism is, they have to learn all these pipelines and stuff. One of the things that I love to hear is like, if you can't learn HCL and you can't learn Terraform, are you really a software developer? And I'm just like, that's not a really that's a really weird thing to say. Like, they're actually writing code in high level languages every day. The fact that they don't want to learn this random tool that you introduced to them because you said it was the right way to do things is really kind of an interesting tactic. But anyway, I digress. The second experience that we kind of talk about is the CDK experience. And so I have a CDK project here. If you look in my library, you can see I'm just, again, creating a VPC here, and very similar workflow. And what you would do here is you would do CDK synth. And we'll wait a second. I can hear my laptop fans whirring in the background, which is always a good sign.
You must be compiling Nogojiri.
Yeah.
there's a good old chef callback for
oh man, if I will not miss Nokogiri, let me tell you. And so the asset that you actually end up with in the execution experience, very similar to a Terraform plan, is you get this this CloudFormation template, which is a bunch of YAML. And I personally have authored CloudFormation templates in the past. I never want to have to write these again. Like, I mean, if it, like, obviously it's complicated by the CDK auto generation, but this, like, if I was to look at this, I would have no idea what this is actually doing without really studying what's going on here. So from an authoring experience, it's kind of interesting, but essentially it's going to create a VPC. And it's going to create this static manifest, and this is the kind of thing that you apply, and then you do CDK deploy, and this is the CDK deploy command runs locally, but it's essentially sending this CloudFormation template off to somewhere else. And that is being run inside CloudFormation. So you can see it's creating this CloudFormation change set, and it's going away and actually kind of provisioning on the cloud provider side. And if you've ever used CloudFormation, you'll be super familiar with these create in progress and rollback fail complete and all that kind of stuff, things that you get. But essentially, this is the the experience that you are getting when you are doing execution via CloudFormation templates. It's all handled server side. You kind of don't get any ability to change this at all as a user. You are essentially handing off the experience to CloudFormation for all of the pros and cons of that. And so this is something that I think we often hear when we talk to Pulumi customers about, well, what about CDK? And this is something that I don't really enjoy handing off these things to CloudFormation for a variety of reasons that I won't get into now. But handing these things off to CloudFormation is an opinionated mechanism that you are going to have to live with when you are deploying your infrastructure. And that's something that I think is always interesting. So we'll wait for that to finish. And I kept the authoring experience for these two examples relatively simple because I had to throw them together in a couple of hours this morning. But then I am going to show you in a second the different types of Pulumi experience you get. And why I think Pulumi is unique in its mechanism, because it will allow you to choose your experience, basically. And was it, if you've ever looked at our website, there's a case studies website, and I don't know if you want to pull that up, but there's a really great case study that I like to talk about with all of our customers that talks about by Panther Labs, and they talk about, and they actually measured how much more productive they were moving from CloudFormation to Pulumi, and they took graphs and everything, and like, not only were they writing less code, it was way faster. It was much faster. Now, it's not a valid comparison because this CDK construct is also deploying NAT gateways, which take a little bit of time. But that Panther Labs case study, I love sharing that with customers, because a customer of ours, Panther Labs, who we love, basically evaluated Pulumi and were kind of blown away by how much faster their experience was. So, I think that's a really great case study, and hopefully everybody gets a chance to read it. While we're waiting for this to finish, let's look at the Pulumi experience, and hopefully that's embiggened enough. Matt, what do you think?
One way to find out is anybody complains.
That's okay. Right. So the Pulumi execution experience. So let me make sure I've got a valid.
That was also the key to the old sysadmin in me, which is, well, what does this thing do? I don't know. Let's turn it off and see if anybody complains.
Oh man,
that's how we know what that server does.
I was helping a buddy with a projector the other day, and like the projector wasn't working. I just turned it off and turned it back on again. I was like, "This is my job now."
I swear, I was in an organization and we had a Novell server, and nobody knew. I mean, we had many Novell servers, but there was one network server where like, we don't know what this is, we don't know what's on it, and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna put in change control. I'm just gonna turn it off and
hope it works." Yeah, absolutely.
After about a month or so, nobody said anything, and we could retire the server. So, yeah.
So the execution experience for Pulumi, right? Like, I've got a multi-language component here. We did a great live stream a couple of weeks ago about how to build these multi-language components. So you can see the authoring experience is basically whatever language you wish to choose. I'm going to let's run the Python example. And so this is a multi-language component. It's not a direct comparison to the CDK and Terraform examples because, I have an existing multi-language component I can share. So you can see here, I'm going to deploy a bunch of infrastructure with Pulumi, and I can, of course, have the same experience as a. No, I cannot. Oh, I need to activate my virtual env. Hold on a second. VM bin activate. Clear pip3 install -r requirements. No, okay, I'm gonna bail out on this and go to the Node.js example. Bad. So npm install. Okay, cool. And then yarn link. Storm. I think it should work. Palumi preview.
Hey, if this is your first time tuning into a PulumiVision live stream, throw a little hands up emoji in the chat.
Oh man, you see, this is what you get for not. I'm going to switch to the Go example now because why not? I haven't set this up properly. Palumi preview, dev. Okay, so this is the experience that you would usually get with Palumi. It's the CI/CD to be able to kind of run a preview and then run a Palumi up, and this is compiling a Go binary at the moment, so it's going to take a second. This is what you get for not being prepared. So you can see it's going to provision a bunch of infrastructure, and I can follow the usual mechanism that you get with with a infrastructure as code, and run a Palumi up. You can run a Palumi preview. You can do all those kind of things that you kind of used to in your standard kind of execution cycle. And so it's very common to see users use Palumi in a CI/CD pipeline. It's usually where most organizations start, and I think it's the correct place to start in a lot of circumstances. As you're building your infrastructure and as you're starting out with a tool, putting it into a CI/CD pipeline and authoring your code in the language that you understand. In this particular case, it's written in the Go SDK. That's generally what we recommend, and so that's very similar to the Terraform experience. Now, what I think is unique about Palumi is that you can also choose your experience. And so what I've got here is a custom command line tool that is going to allow us to choose our experience. So let's say help. So what I've done here is I've put this Palumi program into a command line application, which I'm calling prod app. And I can now create a very similar experience to something you might see in a platform as a service like Heroku. And so if I do deploy help, and I'm going to call this Matty, and I'm going to call the image equals Nginx. And you can see, look, because I'm creating my own command line tool, I can add default settings like the default port and stuff like that. Hopefully I've prepared everything here. But look, I can create my own manual custom user experience. And shout out to my friend and former colleague, Kamal Ali, for helping me build this amazing user experience here. But I can kind of create my own adventure. And this execution experience, you can put things in. You could put this in things like, you could put this into a CI/CD pipeline if you really wanted to. But you could also kind of connect all of the code that we have in the command line interface that we built. You can add that to a workflow engine. You can really, because you can do basically anything with this, with the code that you've written. It's possible for you to kind of build your own user experience. Now, if you like more of the of the web interface type mechanism, maybe you want to build.
Oh man, I was stealing your thunder in the chat. So I put a link to a blog post I wrote about a developer portal, but it's probably going to use the same platform that you're about to show.
See, this is what I get for changing how I use Python last night. And so I have basically, I ripped out my Python in version and started using PyEnv. So let's do 3.10. This is not going to work. I don't think this is going to work. Let's try now. pip3 install. Nope, that's not going to work. This is not going to work. Oh, I'm so frustrated. I should have prepared a little bit better. But there is actually a web interface here that I've created using Flask, which kind of builds our, uses our Pulumi program. And so you can actually create your own server-side experience as well if you really want to, using the Pulumi SDK as well and using Automation API. So the key thing to really remember here is that it's quite possible for you to kind of completely rethink the infrastructure as code execution experience if you really want to. Like, if a CI/CD workflow is not necessarily the right way that you would like to kind of like define infrastructure deployments for your downstream users, with Automation API, with Palumi, you can basically choose the experience that you really want. So lesson learned for me to not switch Python interpreters overnight, and hopefully I'll tinker around in the background while we're kind of finishing this out and see if I can get this working. But yeah, it's possible for you to be able to kind of do anything you really want when it comes to Palumi. Let me see.
Okay, I was going to say, yeah, there've been a lot of folks, been things coming up in the chat about Automation API and that being a thing, and I will tell you, just on a personal story, that was one of the things when I was looking to come join Pulumi, and it was shortly before Automation API, I think, had been announced, but I remember, talking through, with Joe and, the founder and these ideas. And I don't even know that it 100% was referred to me in the name that it had, but it was like, okay, this is what is making a lot of sense to me about what, and again, as someone who spent a lot of time in the Chef ecosystem and seeing what people were trying to do with Chef. And we built a lot of jump hosts with Janky Bash to tie together Chef cookbooks to do things where, because what you're doing, almost never are you, configuring one instance that lives by itself, right? And I'm not even talking about your distributed microservices and all that, but your systems are the compute and the data, and then also all the supporting systems like PagerDuty and ServiceNow and New Relic and all these other pieces that come into it. And when we think about what I want to be able to do in whatever is the right, again, to Lee's point, how do you, this all comes back to DevOps collaboration too, because nobody in an organization, there was a time you could hold that whole stack in your head. There was, years ago, I could sit there and I could think about, when I was at apartments.com for a long time and I ran tech ops there, and I understood that whole system. I knew the stack. I knew what all the services were. I knew what they did. I knew what talked to what. I knew all the names of the databases, even though they changed. By the way, one of my favorite things is because you never can rename anything because it's so hard. We had one service that was basically the thing we used to send out emails, and the database had one name. the web service had another name, and the Windows service had yet a third name because they were all named after the product we used. And every time you changed the product, you couldn't change the thing. Anyway,
It's the old computer science adage, right? Like
yeah.
3 hard things in computer science, naming things and off by one problems, right?
But,
Like, yeah, like.
but even then, even in a complicated system like that, it was able to understand that you can't do that now. And so it means that we have to be more collaborative, both in terms of like how we solve problems and how we, if we think about responding to incidents and stuff, but when we're building our infrastructure, like these things are all very intertwined and we have these codependencies and our systems are distributed even in ways we didn't design them to be distributed. So long story short, you can't have just one way. So I think that goes back to Lee's point, which is like, how are we building things in a way that is collaborative, where everybody can bring their piece of the knowledge, of the domain knowledge, to the automation, to the deployment, to all of that, rather than having a few people in the organization that somehow have to know everything because they know the deployment tool.
I think the one thing I want people to take away from the conversation we've had today is that, like, when you are choosing anything, whether it's infrastructure tooling, whether it's whether it's a random Node.js front end or one of the million Node.js front ends, the thing that I really like people to take away is that, like, we all have our personal preferences. I have my personal preferences on lots of things. But in order to grow in your career and be a successful technologist and be somebody who is going to, be able to kind of become a leader or a technical lead or a principal engineer or whatever, you need to be able to be pragmatic enough to think about what everybody wants to do. And I think this is somewhere where, we talked about the configuration languages versus software languages thing. The industry's changing. If you really want to hold on to your configuration languages and you really want to think about the way that these things are done, it's going to be a tough slog for you. You know what I mean? It's going to be really, really difficult for you to think about the future, because at the end of the day, more people are going to want to use software languages than configuration language. It's just at this stage, there's 10 million Java developers. There's countless JavaScript developers. We are at the point where I think the tide has turned, and we really need to start thinking about the user experience from a personal perspective that includes everybody rather than your own personal preferences. And guess what, Matty? I got this demo working.
All I know is I don't know if I'm the only one. And again, I feel like oftentimes on this stream, I age myself. But when Lee said, think about the future, all I could think about was Jack Nicholson in the 1989 Batman going, "Hey, Eckhart, think about the future." I love this thing so in the chat, I just popped it up on the screen though. It said that building a platform to automatically spawn infrastructure and deploy the system for their consultants. And that's really, really great. That's super exciting stuff. So okay, what did you fix?
Just give me a second. Give me a second.
I fixed it, except not yet.
I got a page. Okay, so
let me know when you're ready for me to share.
I'm ready to go. To go.
Here we go.
So I installed all my dependencies and got everything working again. And you can see here I've started a little Flask web application. So this could be running in your production environment. It could be running in a Fargate container or something along those lines.
Hey, Lee.
Yeah.
Why don't you pop your camera off for a second, because then everybody can see the screen. That's the only way I can pull you and me off the screen.
There we go.
Okay, there we go.
So this is the web server started up, and this is again, shout out to my friend and amazing former colleague Kamal Ali for putting this, building the foundations of this demo. But you can build these kind of self-serve platforms that you can use for people to provision infrastructure. So I'm going to hit create new. I'm going to call this Matty Web, and I'm going to run the Nginx Docker image. And we know the Nginx Docker image runs on port 80. So I'm going to hit create. And if I go back to my logs here, you can see it's running a Pulumi program in the background, right? It's creating a bunch of Kubernetes stuff. And I'm getting an error that one of our streams is having connection issues. Hopefully everybody can see me.
I'm seeing, it looks like everything is okay. Your shared screen is coming through, your audio is coming through, so that's all that matters.
So it's provisioning our web application, but again, we've got that server-side experience that you would get with Azure Resource Manager and with CloudFormation. It's the same experience, but Pulumi has given us the capability and the mechanism to create our own server-side experience without having to, kind of get baked into the, the experience that CloudFormation gives us. And I can hit delete here, and it's going to go and delete that and all that kind of stuff. And so one thing that I see and think is a really powerful combination is creating a self-serve platform like this that then dispatches jobs into another kind of worker mechanism, whether that's a Kubernetes job per deployment or something like Temporal/Cadence that can actually do the provisioning itself. That you can still create your own server-side experience here. And this is just a simple demo, so it just kind of does it all in the web page. But if you need something way more robust and way more kind of powerful, you can build all of this together with a server-side experience. And I think this is the thing that I was trying to get across in the thread, really, in terms of in terms of experience, in terms of the execution experience. This is what Pulumi gives you. This is what we are trying to do. I think I do genuinely think there's going to be a lot of innovation here over the next couple of years, because the authoring experience is really what we've all focused on for such a long time, but the execution experience is up for grabs. And I think I've said that a couple times already, but hopefully it's coming across.
I think one of the keys, and what's sort of hidden behind this a little bit, and you're putting the execution in front of it, but there's a little bit of something that maybe, the good practice of like the component resources kind of thing kind of straddles the authoring and the execution a little bit. But conceptually, but here again, we go back to the guardrails idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're kind of thinking about how I always, again, apologize. I'm going to sort of use like an Apache Tomcat example, but there's other places, but at least we're going to sort of be kind of agnostic and not talk about a specific cloud, because we'll talk about an old Java, application server instead. But okay, so let's say I'm the middleware admin somewhere, right? And I'm like, okay, there's like 50,000 different dials you can turn on Tomcat. I'm an application developer that just wants to deploy something to Tomcat. There's like 5 things that I want to be able to set. So anyway, long story short, what we're trying to do here is codify your organization's good practices and standards into a way that they can be consumed, right? We're only, and so for non-software developers like me and Lee, who don't understand object-oriented stuff, and because we don't understand dogs and cats, right? What we're doing is it's an abstraction, though, right? We're saying we're exposing this particular thing. So what I like to do is think about, to use the metaphor, is if, say, we're saying again, like the Kubernetes deployment that was there's a lot of stuff that can go in that deployment. What I, as the subject matter expert on Kubernetes deployments, in the way that we do them in my organization, I define the shape of the dial. What you get to do is just decide what you turn the dial to. And that's cool.
I like that. That's a really great analogy.
I don't want to have to go in and answer, again, think about this way, whether it's a web, fundamentally think about it as a giant web form, even if it's in programming. And I'm like, okay, I have to answer 150 different questions to get this Kubernetes deployment happening. I know 3 things. I care about 3 things. Okay, cool. I want to do that. You do all the rest. And this is when we talk about, you think about this idea of what I call lowercase and uppercase compliance, right? Uppercase compliance is like SOX and, PCI and whatever. Lowercase compliance is just following the standards of your company or your organization. And if we can codify that, it makes it a lot easier for people to meet them. And there's 2 ways you can approach that. And you kind of need to approach it in both. One of the more traditional ways is, well, we'll put a bunch of tests into our pipeline to make sure you don't jack stuff up. Okay, cool. But that sucks, because I don't know that I jacked it up till I hit the test and whatnot. And I don't even know I have to do all that. But if I make it, I always believe you make the right way the easy way. Mm-hmm. And this is how we're bringing it back to like kind of my DevOps preaching, if you will, right? People ask me a lot of times, what are the best DevOps books? And none of them are technical. I mean, there's great DevOps books that are technical, but
I've been around long enough to remember that DevOps was supposed to be culture.
It's all of them. We just talk about culture the most because it's the one that people have to hear. Nobody has to convince engineers to play with automation. You're just going to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'll tell you, there's two. But the reason I'm going somewhere with the story, it'll make sense. It'll all come back to this Trust me. So people say the two most important DevOps books, I'll say they're Freakonomics, and then there's a book. Oh yeah, they're also User Share Main. Nova's right. The other one though is this book called Switch, and it's about change management. And I don't mean ITIL change management or CMDBs. It's called How to Change When Change is Hard. And there's a story in there about this place where they, it was a manufacturing company, and they had this machine, and people kept cutting their hands on the blade. So traditionally, how would we solve this problem? We'd throw a lot of training at it. We'd put up a lot of warning signs. We'd do all this communication. They redesigned the machine so that to turn it on, you had to use two hands, which meant you were physically incapable of getting your hand in front of the blade because you couldn't turn it on otherwise. So the more that we can make the right way the easy way, people will go that path because that's what we want. Not because they're lazy. We want to do good work, but take that cognitive load off and take us down that happy path. But I really do. I think, I'm going to have to, good DevOps copy, great DevOps steal. So I might have to steal Nova's line there when I talk about my best DevOps books, but Matt is the right one there.
I think we'll finish out with like, if you're in this space and you think that, 5 or 6 years ago, or even 10 years ago with configuration management, that things were going to, be finished, for want of a better way of phrasing it. I think we're just about to hit the most exciting part of infrastructure as code, infrastructure as software, in the next 3 or 4 years, right? Like there's still so much to happen here. There's still great innovation coming through all of the different players in the game. We didn't even talk about crossplane today. There's a completely different mechanism for execution experience. I've said it on Twitter. I'm going to say it again to everybody watching. We have an event next week on May the 4th, and we have so much exciting stuff coming out next week that, I pride myself on keeping up to date with basically everything that we release because, I'm first line with our customers and I want to be able to talk about it. I had to take a second and actually remember what was going on next week because there is so much stuff being announced. And we randomly dropped a feature yesterday on the Pulumi service side because we had so much content for next week that we had to kind of release something a week early. We had to take something out of the agenda. And that was org tokens, if you're not familiar with that. So do join us. If you aren't a Palumi user and you're just here to enjoy Matty's conversation and you're not a Palumi user, join anyway, because there's loads and loads of great content coming up on the 4th of May, and I'm super excited about it. And I think we are really in an exciting time for infrastructure as code.
I think you make a good point. I'm going to kind of really quick just sort of step through because there's absolutely things happening at Palumi Up that are not Palumi specific. So I did a little bit of a presentation, had a fireside chat with Justin Fitzhugh of Snowflake, and we really were just talking about organizational change, which was amazing. Yeah. There's an infrastructure as code panel that Chris Nova, amongst some other folks, is on. I'm bringing up Nova because she's been in the chat, and pretty much is a banger of a panel. Don't miss it. We got a bunch of other cool stuff. And then finally, the other thing that is part of Palumi Up, it's happening on May 5th. So it'll be the follow-up day. But if you register for Palumi Up, which is free, you get into it. We're having our very first Palumi Community Summit. So I want to say it's from like 8 a.m. to noon U.S. Pacific time on the 5th. And it's all open spaces. We'll be talking about things people want to do with Palumi. Again, it's going to be a little more Palumi focused. But it's open spaces, and it's one of my favorite types of things. I'm really looking forward to it. And we'll have the whole Palumi community there, which some of them might get, we might get our paychecks from Palumi. Some of us don't, but we're all part of the community and we'll all be together. And our next, again, whatever platform you're watching on here, push like, subscribe, follow. I don't know. It's all different on all the different ones, but do the thing. I'm
gonna jump in there. In there. You just said we might not all get our paychecks from Palumi. If you want to get your paycheck from Palumi, we are hiring like crazy. And I did a thread yesterday. I made a transition from infrastructure engineering into developer advocacy, and now I'm in solutions engineering. If you're thinking that having that on-call pager is kind of the end of your, you're losing the end of your tether with that on-call pager, and you want to kind of talk to customers and produce amazing content like this, get in touch with me or get in touch with me or Matty or anyone else at Pulumi, and we will happily talk to you about what we're doing here at Pulumi. If any of this excites you, come and join us, come and work with us. We are a rocket ship, so it's a really great place to work.
And we got that. So again, and we so please tune in. Actually, our next, remember, I started the stream by saying, hey, it is it's Friday, which means it's time for PulumiVision. That said, next week's PulumiVision will be on a Thursday at a different time because it's part of Palumi Up. But towards the end of the day, so around 2:30, at noon Pacific, here on PulumiVision, I will have Luke Hoban, who's our CTO, and we're going to just recap all the amazing stuff that happened the day before. And if you are finally, because all this stuff, there's just so much. We're very excited about Palumi Up. We're also very excited about all of the sleeping that we will do when it's over, because everyone will be so tired from all this stuff that we're bringing you. But if Palumi's new to you and you haven't done anything with it, but you're kind of into it, I will be teaching a workshop next Thursday too. All of this stuff is on, if you go to the Palumi Up link that I put in the chat and I put on the stream, check it out. You'll see all the stuff. We're super excited. Thanks for joining us. Follow, subscribe, like, do all the things, and we will see you on the